Hey Bristles, a short intro today because it's going to be a pretty long video. It is under an hour, so that's good, but it's still going to be pretty long. But don't worry, it's not going to suck, unlike the character we're painting today, because it is of course the first character for my soulblight gravelords army, which is naturally going to be a soulblight gravelord, vampire lord. So without any further delay, because this video has been delayed about a week just because of how long it's taken to record and edit, let's get to the painting. Enjoy! Apologies for the background noise there in my intro. I live right next door to a primary school and it's currently lunchtime. Nothing really I can do about that because I am on a schedule. Anyway, gonna try and fire through this in real time and not have many clips, but here is our vampire lord. I've kept the shield separate and I'm going to snap her head off in a little while just because it makes it easier to paint. Let's start off with the skin and get some colour on the palette. So I've got Bugman's Glow here, Rakarth Flesh, Pallid Witch Flesh and Decala Violet, and also some Skull White. I'm going to start off and try and get through most of the skin here first, but I do go back later on to touch up some bits once I have other colours next to the face for frame of reference. So starting off with a base coat of Rakarth Flesh. It's a good covering paint. It's also suitably pale for a white vampire skin. Now I originally wanted to do a darker kind of skin tone for this vampire, but because of I've kind of hobbied myself into a corner in terms of the colours that I can use for paint selection and still have it stand out, because the base is going to be the snow base to fit with my army, which means that the model itself needs to have a overall darker colour scheme. So in order to make the face stand out against that darker colour scheme, it's not impossible to do it with a darker skin tone, but it just to make it easier and read a bit more vibrantly compared to the dark armour I'm going to do, I've kind of painted myself into a corner and have resorted to doing a generic pale white vampire skin. But yeah, so highlight the Rakarth Flesh with Pallid Witch Flesh. You will have noticed a little bit of back and forth between the palette and the brush there, and the colours, because even though it was off screen you'll have seen me going back and forth, but that's because I was doing a tiny bit of attempt at blending between the shadow and the lighter highlighted areas, because it being a vampire, similar to elves and more feminine faces, you don't want too stark of a difference between the highlights and the shadows unless it's deliberately sculpted so. But typically elves and vampires are, I know, the features we would find synonymous with their appearance would be kind of smooth features, so that's skin, but again it's a vampire, so we do have quite prominent cheekbones. Eventually we start mixing some Pallid Witch Flesh with some Skull White, the white that I put down, and highlight it up until the final highlight will of course be white. Then to add a little bit of subtle warmth, a trope that I do like with vampires is that yes, they are pale, but they can become slightly flushed when they have fed. So I take some Bugman's Glow and thin it down and use that to shade the places very subtly where there would be shadow, so around the eyes, in the ears, below the cheekbones, to kind of tie into the rest of my army and the cool theme. As well, without going too vibrant, I also use Decala Lilac in the exact same way, so thin it down quite a bit and kind of feather it on there. So that means just putting it into the darkest place I want it to be and pulling the pigment through the water that the pigment is in to the place where I want it darkest and pulling it away from where I've highlighted. And you'll see there I did also make a mix of Decala Violet and the base colour Rakarth Flesh and use that for shading too. Altogether this allows us to create some shadow that's not too stark but allows us to emphasize the features. I'm focusing most of my shadow on the side of the face where the hair is, because the way the model is, and you can't see it when the head's not on the model, its head is turned to the side slightly, and armor coming, like a, what would you call it, a collar coming up around the head. So the face is turned slightly on that side to the collar, so it will naturally be shaded a little bit. So going further with some of the shading, thinning down some warm purple from Warcolor's Nostalgia range, and I'm focusing this around the eyes and around the hairline to try and get a nicer separation between the face, the skin and the hair, and also in the ears. Also put a bit of this in the mouth just to get a bit of colour inside the mouth before the teeth are painted. But I'm not going to put too much colour inside the actual mouth because it's barely open, and I think because this is just to have a nice looking gaming piece, I don't want to put more effort into that. You'll also notice that even when I'm applying shades to the face, because I want so much control and very little surface area covered, given that this is a very small head, I have been sticking with the Insane Detail Wargamer brush from Army Painter, because if I used the usual size brush that I would use, I would end up washing more area of the face than I actually want to. So when it comes to trying to get smoothness and shadows in the right place, control is very important, and whatever makes it easier for you to have that control with your brush, that brush control, then that's what you should do. This could of course be applied with a brush with an excellent tip. I currently need to update my best brush because it has worn out over about 2 years. I think I've been using my Winsor & Newton Series 7, so it needs a bit of a break and I need to get a new one. Every now and then I'd like to give my work a few seconds to dry a bit more so I can get a look at where we stand, because naturally as the paint dries, the finish is going to look somewhat different from how it might look as we're painting. So I'm going to take this minute now to paint the eyes. I'm going to put some Mephiston Red, tiny dot in there, then some Evil Sun Scarlet. This red ends up, I think, looking a little bit too cartoony, but we're building up to something, so just bear with it. And now I'm going to take some Contrast Fleshed Heroes Red and put that in and let it kind of go slightly around the eyes, because I want it to look like the vampire's eyes, like they're in a blood fugue or a rage or a hunger, so that's reflected in maybe the saturation of blood in their eyeballs. I don't know, it's a bit silly, but it's a stylistic choice. For now we're going to move away from the skin, and I'm going to start painting the hair to try and frame the face and get a better idea of where I'd like to go next, if there's anything I want to do with the face. So I'm just putting some transitions down on my palette between Chaos Black, Dark Reaper and Celestra Grey. The Dark Reaper, again, I'm reusing colours from previous paint jobs for units in the army, so I did use quite a bit of Dark Reaper in my painting my skeletons. So even though this vampire, it's overall going to look pretty different to how the skeletons look, it will still be tied in because there will be a bit of colour uniformity between the vampire and the skeletons, because I've reused some colours. So with the colours that I have set out on my palette and mix transitions of, I'm going to just wet blend throughout the hair, focusing the highlights on the bends in the hair where it turns so that it might catch and reflect the light, and also close but not straight up to where the hair meets the head itself. So for the footage, I have it running at 3 times speed, just so that it doesn't take all day, but I am going to let it run for a little while just so you can observe how I do the blend, and so you can analyze that yourself should you wish to try wet blending yourself, just like with the shields in my previous video, if you'd like to check that out. I will put timestamps wherever they go. I'll figure out how to do it where you can actually see the timeline on YouTube. Once I get to a point with the blends that I'm somewhat happy with, I will usually come in then and start to highlight. However, sometimes this shows me that the blends aren't quite where I'd like them to be at, and I go back. Again, repeating myself, there is a good bit of back and forth until I get to where I'm happy with. So this new direction I'm kind of taking with painting in my videos, where I'm documenting models where I previously might not have, where I am trying pretty hard to do a good job. Obviously I'm not putting in like the kind of effort that would be needed for a golden demon, say, or some other prestigious painting competition, but I am putting in quite a bit of effort, so it's a little bit odd. I'm not sure where I fit in terms of who these videos might be for, because I don't consider myself well, I wouldn't really consider myself a pro painter, but I also, army painting is not something that I particularly enjoy. That is to say, I love having painted armies, I really do. I generally won't play unless the majority of my army is painted or has some kind of paint on it. But I don't really offer like quick, get your army battle ready in like a quick amount of time kind of painting videos, which there's nothing wrong with those, they're fantastic. There's loads of people out there who do army painting videos and the armies look stunning and they're done in no time with simple and effective methods, and I wish I could do that. I get my enjoyment from pushing myself to try harder. So I guess that would be who these are for, is people like me who want to push themselves, I guess. I don't know. It's a bit weird. I'm trying to put in some filler chat right now, but I'm not quite sure what to say. I'm also a pretty anxious person, so I feel a bit weird just waffling on. So yeah, I just thought I'd point that out, because in this video and the last video I did leave parts running where I was pushing myself to improve and put that extra effort in. So let me know in the comments, where do you see yourself in terms of that kind of demographic? Are you watching for paint recipes, or because you too also like to push yourself to paint these models, or do you just enjoy watching people paint, which I do? I don't actually watch videos where people are pushing themselves to improve too much. I just watch a mix of all sorts of hobby and all level of painting for miniatures, because I just really like it. So I've just painted the front of the hair here, and the back of it is still bare. I'm going to come back and do that later in my own time. I'll not record that now, but there's how the head's looking. I think now might be a good time to move on to painting the bats, and I'm going for kind of a brown fur on the bats, and I'm basing them with Rhinox hide. Main reason I'm going for the brown, a brown color, a warm brown for the bats, is to make them stand out a little bit different from, well, obviously I don't want them to be black because then they would get lost in the hair, but the warm brown is going to complement nicely with how I intend to paint the armor, which you'll see soon. For the wing membranes on the bats, I paint them using Bugman's Glow. And now to highlight the brown, I've got Doombull brown, which is a lovely reddish brown. To highlight the membranes, I use a mixture of Bugman's Glow and Ungor Flesh. I'm not actually sure. See, I've lost footage once or twice in the recording of this video. I think I actually lost the part where I highlight with that mixture, but then the following mixture is not a mixture at all. Actually, I misspoke. So first of all, wing membrane, Bugman's Glow, then a mixture of Bugman's Glow and Ungor Flesh. Now a highlight of just Ungor Flesh. Apologies, I had some issues with my camera where it froze and it said it kept recording, and I tried to turn it off and it didn't turn off and it kept recording. I had to take the battery out to get it to stop for whatever reason, but the clip that I was recording when that happened is completely unplayable. So anyway, and then to highlight the brown, I had initially intended, when I put my colors on the paint palette, to use Steel Legion Drab, but as I was painting I decided that one was a little too close to where I was going with the Bugman's Glow, so I opted instead to use Carrick Stone. With the bats all highlighted, I was feeling a little bit like the main body brown. I went a bit too far with the highlights, so I thinned down some Rhinox hide with some Chaos Black and just made a wash of that, a glaze maybe, and just put it all over the bats. While I was painting the hair and the bats, I had been contemplating the eyes, and I'm deciding now to give them a wee highlight of Bugman's Glow, followed by another highlight of Bugman's Glow mixed with white, and just a very tiny dot highlight of that, but not finished yet. Just gonna take a tiny bit of white and dot it in there and clean up anywhere where I might have made a mistake. Also, at this point I decide it's time to revisit the hair a little bit and, I don't know, fuss over it a little while, push the contrast a bit more between the brightest points and the darkest points, and I push the highlights in a few certain places. I do usually come back to like where I have elements connecting to one another when I finish one, or I think I'm finished one, and then I finish the next one, I'll come back and revisit it to try and get it to work together in harmony. So moving on to the armor for now, I decided to paint a test panel in a black that I thought I was going to go with, but ultimately I felt it was too close to the hair and it would all just blend together and look kind of boring, so I instead opted to go for a deep red. So I'm mixing some corn red with some chaos black, and that's going to be the base layer for all of my armor. I am deciding to paint the armor all in red and not do any like fancy embellishments with the for example the shoulder pads or the wee wings on the knees that would like have them in gold or anything, because I just felt really drawn to committing to the red. So to highlight up the red panel, I mixed in a little bit more of the corn red to make a brighter highlight. And also, it's not just a highlight, I am using some close around the edges and feathering out. There's a few parts where I felt like the contrast was too much, so I decided to try and fix it by coming back with the previous darker color and doing a little bit of blending. To be honest, I paint this first part on camera and I do quite a bit of wet blending, but as I go on and paint the rest of the armor off camera, I don't think I do as much as I do in this scene, but I think that's more because I get familiar with the process that I'm using and just don't need to go back and forth as much, and kind of get a bit more control with thinning down the paint to a consistency where I don't necessarily have to come back with my darker color and push it in. But once I'm finished highlighting with the mixture of corn red and chaos black, and then the mixture with corn red and chaos black with some more corn red mixed in, I just highlight with corn red. And all the while the tips of like where it would come most into light and there's those strong pointy edges, I do feather a little bit more out from just the edge. So for the next highlight, I'm going to take corn red and mix it with Bugman's Glow. I had considered using a brighter red, but I think that's a more vibrant and warm color, and this I wanted to be a more kind of muted and kind of rustic red. For this highlight stage, you can see I have switched back to the smaller brush and just doing a nice thin highlight with that mix. And anywhere where I might make a few wee mistakes, I will come back with my previous color because it's still on my palette and just tidy it up. And there's a few parts on the armor where there seems to be like a bend in the armor or a line that's kind of raised, so I just use the same process that I've used for all of the edges to add a kind of a light reflection on that, which you can see under like the part that I'm doing just there. I just build that up a little bit. And on the opposite side, it's actually not on that panel, it's on the foremost panel, so you'll see that once I come back with the full armor painted. And for the next stage, so just rinse and repeat, same process again, but a much finer highlight with just Bugman's Glow on its own, nothing else mixed in. And you'll see here, I don't think I I highlight every line with it, but I end up highlighting every line on the rest of the model with it. So for the next highlight, I take some pallid witch flesh and mix that into the Bugman's Glow and just highlight the sharpest edges and the finest points, but also a little bit out from it. This is where we're leaving the armor for now. At this point, I think I'm done, but I do come back at the very end and add in one tiny dot highlight, but that's right at the very end. And now I'm just going to hold the head beside it to get an idea of how the colors are working next to each other, and I'm really happy with that. So next I'm going to take Chaos Black paint and paint it on any of the fabric that's that's visible between the armor plates. So it's really just around the neck. There's a tiny piece which I actually completely forget to highlight going forward. There's also the back of the knees and some cloth hanging, like tiny bit of cloth hanging underneath the shoulder pads. And now it's time to move on to the metals. I'm starting off with black metal from the Metal in Alchemy range from scale 75, but I recently saw somebody using I think it was Iron Warriors or Iron Warrior paint from Citadel, and it looks really close, although I will say black metal has a kind of a navy tint to it, so a dark blackish blue. So I'm not sure, I'll have to try the Iron Warrior paint at some stage. It does look quite nice. And then I'm going to just highlight the metals with heavy metal from the same range. I'm not sure what the Games Workshop alternative would be right now. I haven't really kept up to date with their metallics since I was put off them, but I am tempted to give them another go. I had used them for many years. I have been painting miniatures, Warhammer specifically, for maybe 25 years now. So, but anyway, just going to use that to edge highlight. There's also a few surfaces close to where there would be corners and along the edges where I do layer it a little bit, but pulling the pigment towards the corners. And I'm going to use some other paint that isn't metallic in a moment to kind of smooth that transition from where the metal is light to where it would be shaded. And now to shade the metal, I'm going to take some Inky by Darkness, put some on the palette. Oh wait, no, I'm not shading the metal yet, but we'll come back to that. I'm going to highlight the fabric parts. Oh, I also forgot to say when I was blocking out the fabric parts that there's that wee loincloth thing. But anyway, highlight with Inky by Darkness, and here I am thinning down the Inky by Darkness to shade the metal. So you can see right there where the light comes to a fold almost in the armor, and directly underneath where that light would hit, that's where we want to focus our shadow to make it darker, and as it comes down the curve we lighten it. So we're going to pull the pigment in the water towards the darkest parts. I've mentioned this before, and then where it goes lighter, it's more so water with a tiny bit of pigment. And when it comes to the weapon, I just want to make sure and get it into all those recesses and separate the actual bladed parts of this mace thing. I want to define the separation there with that. I did actually drop my vampire around now and did snap the weapon, but as a quick repair. And here's how the shield is looking. Just having a gander. Looks lovely, doesn't it? I don't think I forgot to record this next section. I think there was a second point where my camera was acting a maggot and pooped its pants. And I lost the footage from that again, where the camera just froze but wouldn't turn off until I took the battery out. But all I've done with the fabric following on from the Incubi Darkness highlight is highlight again with Thunderhawk Blue. And then the next highlight for the fabric is Fenrisian Grey. At this point it's time to tackle the dragon on the shield. I debated quite a bit on what colour to choose for this. I was inclined to paint it that bright red you see on the box art of the model, but I instead decided to go a little bit different and try something new. So just going to take some Chaos Black on a new palette, Clean Sheet and Incubi Darkness, Dark Reaper, Fenrisian Grey, Pallid Witch Flesh, and some Skull White. This is going to be another long stretch here because I'm going to try something a little different, and I'm going to try pushing myself to do like a nice blend here where the highlights are all caught on the various folds of the shield, and try and get nice contrast between where the light catches and where the shadows are. So first of all, I'm mapping out where exactly I want some of the brighter parts to be with some mid-tone of the Dark Reaper and the Incubi Darkness, mostly the Incubi Darkness. The reason I've gone for Incubi Darkness is I really like this colour. It's one of my favourite Games Workshop paints ever, and I just love the green tint it gives. Once I've got some of the mid-tones mapped in, I quickly start to blend in some of the lighter things, and this section of the video is going to be quite long. I just thought it'd be worthwhile leaving in the process to show exactly how I got it to where I want it to be. Obviously there's going to be room for improvement, but I'm really happy with how this turns out. Once I've got most of the mid-tones to light tones mapped out and happy with them so far, I'll come back in with the pure black and reinforce some of the shadows, and then blend them back up to the mid-tone. We must be very close now to the release of the Death Rattle starter set. Who knows what's coming at the same time, or if they'll split the release. I have a feeling that it'll be the Death Rattle set first, and then maybe the following week or a couple of weeks later we'll see Prince Fordry and the standalone release of the Death Rattle units outside of that box. However, they have mentioned that there are going to be a few more teasers or reveals of what's coming for soulblight Gravelords, and we're still waiting for those, so I'm not sure how soon we'll be seeing them. I do still speculate that we will get the announcement for the pre-order of that starter set sometime during March. We're in the middle of March now, so if it's not this coming Sunday, I'm sure it'll be the following one. Every Sunday since they announced the new Death Rattle box and the new soulblight Gravelords Battle Tome, I've seen Sunday approach, and I'm filled with both equal parts excitement, anticipation, and sheer dread, because on the one hand I can't wait, they couldn't arrive any sooner. On the other hand, you know, I know it's going to be expensive, and a little bit more time to save up would be really nice. Either way, I'm not complaining. I'm really excited. Soulblight Gravelords have always been, and I think will always be, my favourite faction thematically in Age of Sigmar, and even before that in Warhammer Fantasy, and now in the old world, my Vampire Counts army is my favourite. I love it so much. But yeah, the undead just have a death grip on me. So at this point I'm stopping, letting everything dry just to have a look and see where I'm at and where I want to go. And at this point I'm going to move away from mixing on the mini itself and start mixing some mid-tones that I know specifically where I want to push a little bit more. So mixing that Dark Reaper and Fenrisian Grey, just to push the highlights a little bit, but also still doing a little bit of blending. I know that this is very long and quite arduous, but it's actually a lot of fun. I'm aware that it can be very intimidating. I was intimidated for a long time by the thoughts of pushing myself to do this, to try such blends on such a small area, but I think I'm starting to feel a little bit more confident, and the more I try it, the more I feel, the better I feel I do. And I encourage you to maybe step outside of your comfort zone in terms of where you are at your painting level and push through. Although maybe you're watching this and you're already past this point, and good for you. I hope to get there someday too. Your character models are an excellent opportunity to try these new things and, you know, be a bit more adventurous. Give them a little bit more time. I get to a certain point here where I realize how much of an impact that Inky by Darkness is having. You'll see there where roughly where the belly of the dragon would be. I'm really liking the stark contrast where it goes from the black into the Inky by Darkness, hits the bright highlight on the sharp edge of the shield, and then goes on into a new transition. So what I start to do is add in those final highlights, but also glaze some Inky by Darkness over some of the mid-tones to just tint them a little bit in hue. And now I come to the point where I think I might be close to finishing this part, so I decide it's time to frame it, give it a bit of a highlight, and as well as a highlight I go around where the dragon embossed image meets the shield, and I just go in with some chaos black, being very neat and careful not to ruin any of the red I've done. So I'm really happy with that, and that's how it's looking. I'm really proud. I'm glad I put the time in for that. But now let's return to the metallics, and I'm taking heavy metal again and just doing some small highlights on the sharpest points and around the edges of the trim on the shield. And now I'm going to grab some speed metal, and I'm going to use that for some very fine highlights on the metal, just tiny specks, just a little dot here and there on the sharpest points, and a few selective ones on some particularly sharp edges. Sure would be nice if I could learn to keep everything in focus for you to see. That would be swell. I'll work on that in the future. Maybe I'll make I'll mark out a little box with tape on my desk and just make sure my hands are in there at all times while recording. Oh my god, guys, this is it. We're getting so close to the finish line. I can almost taste it. Oh yeah. Yes, pallid witch flesh. Pallid witch flesh. Pallid witch flesh? Why does this sound so weird? It feels like I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, this is what I mentioned earlier. When I was doing the armor, I come back with that and do a few little spots on every point edge on the armor. And there it is, looking magnificent, but it's base done. I'm just really happy and really proud, and it was a slog, but it was so worth it. I actually kept rubbing the highlights off the sharp tips on the shield, so I ended up fixing them, retouching them, and then brushing on some polyurethane matte varnish from Vallejo, and I'll never know if I'm saying it right. But I only did that on the areas that were not metallic because I didn't want to lose any of that metallic shine. I feel like it's not quite as matte as I expected, and it added a little bit of gloss, but not too much, so it's okay, and I'm still really happy with it. Actually, it's been about a week since I applied that matte varnish, and now that I'm looking at it on my shelf, it's actually quite matte, so never mind. But I'm not sure if it's dulled or not. You'll see now in the end shots, and you can tell me if you think there's much of a difference. If you watched the whole thing, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I hope you learned something from it and you enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comments. Click the like button, subscribe. It means so much to me and it helps so much more than anything. Look after yourselves, be good to each other, and I'll see you again real soon, hopefully next week. Okay, goodbye.